was the task I had you work on. I believe we went over the first three, did we?
Yeah.
Okay, so first one has two solutions. So if you can squeeze that in somewhere that it has two solutions, that's helpful to know. Most of the time, quadratic equations, which is what this unit is about, most of the time they have two solutions. What are my two solutions for number one? Good. So the positive one and the negative one. We just write it together to kind of save some time. Number two, why did I only have one solution? Does anyone remember? If not, maybe work it out mentally or do your work on your paper. What's the opposite of squaring something? Whatever you know, what's that? And what's the square root of 0?
Zero.
0. Is there a plus or minus 0?
No.
So that's why there was just the one solution, because no plus or minus when it's 0, and then you add 6 to each side. That's why there was only one solution. Why in number 3 was there no solution? Because when I did the square rooting, because you would have to subtract the 9 first, it's farther, you cannot take the square root of a negative. At least not in this level. In algebra 3-4, I know you'll have so much fun doing that. But it'll have an error message, it'll say undefined. So when that happens, there's no solution. You cannot square root a negative. Did we go over number 4? I don't think we did. So let's go over that. Number 4, x squared equals 18. That seems easy enough. The x is mostly by itself. How do I get it fully by itself? Square root it. Whatever you do on one side. And then x ends up equaling, is 18 a perfect square? It is not. I know that because when I type it in my calculator, so here's a way you could check in case you don't have your perfect squares memorized. All right, so Desmos, you do have access to. Square root button looks like that. When I type in the 18, I get a decimal. So that tells me it's not a perfect square. You cannot approximate the decimal because it's not exact. It's actually a decimal that goes on forever without repeating. So if you tried rounding it, you would have had like 4.24 and say, here's how you really know it's not exact. Say I had to do square root of 18 times square root of 18. It should give me 18, right? But if I did 4.24 times 4.24, is that equal to 18? It is not. It's equal to that decimal. It's pretty close, but that's why we don't use the decimal version. We use the exact answer. Because if I did square root of 18 times square root of 18, it should just be 18 even. So you cannot give the decimal approximation. You have to do what's called simplifying the radical. That was the lesson I tried getting you guys to learn when the sub was here. So regardless, you can still go back and watch the video. I think it'll make your life a lot easier for these next few lessons. So the way that you simplify a radical, anyone remember? You make a factor tree. What does 18 break down into? Okay, are these both prime? So let's remember what prime means. Prime is when it's only factorable by 1 in itself. So which one is not prime? 9 breaks into. All right, now are we down to all the prime factors? Yes, I'll even cross out the non-prime so that you don't look at them. Only looking at the prime numbers, so the analogy we use. The radical symbol you can also call a what? Or pretend that it is It's not even like a math thing. I want you to pretend that this radical symbol is kind of like a jail. All right, the rule for this jail is I need a pair, like I need a partner in order to escape. Do I have any pairs of the same number? I have a pair of 3. So because I have a pair, they get to escape. You only write it once for each pair. And do I have any prime numbers left over? I have that 2 left over. That 2 does not get to escape. It did not have a partner. It's not a square. Okay, so that means my simplified radical of 18 is 3 radical 2. Questions on that? And really, anytime you square root a number that is not 0 and not negative, you should put a plus or minus here. So for number 4, x equals plus or minus 3 radical 2. Questions on number 4? So if you put a decimal, don't do that anymore. Also, you can check that you simplified it right by typing in before it was simplified and then after. And you get the same exact decimal. That's what I did on a test when I forgot how to simplify. I tried my options and saw which one matched the other one. John? Yes. All right, did we go over number 5? All right, let's go over it. Anytime you're isolating, you want to get the variable by itself, starting with what is. So would that be the, let me write it down first. Would that be the 2 or the 1? How do I cancel the 1? Whatever you do on one side of the equal sign. Okay, great. I get x squared equals 18 minus 1 is opposite of squaring. Okay, good. 17 is not a negative and it's not 0, so I will use the plus or minus. Is 17 a perfect square? So we could try to simplify it. Is 17 factorable by anything other than 1 in itself? So that's what we call prime. When that happens, it's not factorable by anything else. You can just leave it under the radical symbol. It has no partners that can escape. It's just plus or minus the square root of 7 for number 5. Questions on that one? Or not 7, 17. Questions on this one? Did we go over 6? Okay. By the way, side note, number 4 has how many solutions? So kind of fit that in there if you have room. It has 2 solutions because it'd be the positive 3 radical 2 and the negative 3 radical 2. How many solutions does 5 have? 2 solutions. Now we're going to do 6. What do we get rid of first? The 2 or the 1? And how do I get rid of it? Whatever you do on one side. Okay, so on the left I have x plus 1. On the right, we actually simplified that earlier. So I'm going to put plus or minus 3 radical 2 because we already simplified that when we did number 4. Is the x alone? Opposite of adding 1 is whatever you do on one side, you do to the other side. X is alone now, and I can't simplify any more than that. I will write it like this, because that's usually the order they write it in. They usually will put the radical second, but they do mean the same thing. Plus or minus 3 radical 2 minus 1 is the same as negative 1 plus or minus 3 radical 2. That's the answer for 6. Questions, comments, concerns? And there's 2 solutions again for that one. Michael T, did you get something? Yes. 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 When you're done, look at the back side of that note sheet at where they're solving. We're not gonna do the other completing the squares. All right, so looking at the back side, I want you to look at this part. So this was asking us to complete the square. I think we're good. If you still don't know how to complete the square, watch the videos from last week and really focus on the steps. Because all of these quadratics can be solved with whatever way you prefer, as long as you get to the right answer. So there are easier ways than completing the square, and you're going to learn another one of them today. But problems on your test that you'll see will say something to the effect of, this person solved by completing the square, find the mistake. So that's where you would have to know your steps. That's the main purpose. But regardless, this person solved by completing the square and by graphing. Because solutions, kind of like how we did in the first problem today, solutions have other names. What are the other names we use for them with quadratics? On your test, it might say find the solutions, find the, not even one of them. Find the x-intercepts. What else do we call them? Zeros. And this one we haven't really used a lot this year, but they're also called roots. Regardless, you never know how they're going to ask you it on the test, so just be aware of all of them. When I ask you for solutions, I'm really asking you to identify your x-intercepts. So you could check all your answers by graphing, or your zeros or your roots. So look at the graph for this one. It's x-intercepts, they're showing as decimals. Look at what its answer is when they did it. They do not want you to use these decimals as your answers because they're just rounded. They're not exact. This is exact. So that's why it's important you know how to deal with the plus or minus and non-curving squares. So that way you can write it in its exact form, because that's how it would look on your test. Yes. All right, so that's really all I wanted to show you on this page. Really no box star highlight these. These are all the same thing. So regardless of how they ask it on your test, you need to know that it's all the same thing. Questions? I'm actually gonna stop recording so that when we start 16, it's on a fresh video.